Well, hello, everyone. Welcome back to Between Two Somms, a journey that Jesse Becker and I started back, I guess that was back April of 2020, that we're resuming as we have figured out a new cadence and a new way to keep this going. And we appreciate those of you who have joined us today. I'm Ron Edwards, Master Sommelier and Director of Wine Education for Winebow. And then joining me is Jesse Becker, Portfolio Specialist, fellow Master Sommelier, all around amazing dude, as well as extremely passionate about Austria and its wines. And he'll be driving this presentation mostly, and I'm going to join in, of course. But welcome back, Jesse. It's good to have you on this webinar and to be together again.
Thanks, Ron. This is a pleasure to be back. I've missed these little sessions that we put together, so this is great. Thank you.
I did too. I mean, it slowed my studying down. I was having to study every week. Now it's a little bit once a month. So a little bit of preview to everybody. We've changed this from that every week thing that kept everybody busy at the beginning of COVID shutdowns, and we're now going to regularly keep this going on once a month cadence. It's going to be the second Wednesday of the month at noon, just like this one was. And going forward, you can expect that. Put it on your calendar. Don't let meetings get in the way, and you'll be with us each time. All right, so let's get going because time is precious and Burgenland is special. All right, so we are going to talk about Burgenland, Austria today, in honor of the fact that most people think of Austrian wine as primarily white in our country. Wouldn't you say, Jesse?
Actually, it's 70%. Austria produces 70% white wine, just 30% red, although red wine has been on the increase. So there's a little bit more red wine all the time, probably. That's linked a bit to climate change, but they've also been improving as a red wine producing country, just sort of in general. So red wine is up and coming in Austria.
And as regions that are going to be studied for up-and-coming red wine, Burgenland's on the top of the list. It's been focusing on red wine for quite a while now, primarily through two major grapes, Blaufränkisch and Zweigelt, which we will talk about a little bit more today. So if you are thinking to yourself, red wine, Austria, well, please stay tuned because we're going to convince you should go try some. I have no doubt of that. So let's get the overview. So start us right here. What do you say?
There are four main wine producing regions in Austria. The one that we think of probably first and foremost is Niederösterreich. This is where we would find all the great Grüner Veltliner and Riesling that comes from the Danube River Valley. But that is mainly a white wine producing region. And then we see on here Steiermark in the south. This is also a white wine producing region, aromatic white varieties, Sauvignon Blanc, a specialty there. Vienna, always an interesting one. We've got to make that a Between Two Somms because there's over 600 hectares within the capital city, 1.9 million people, and it's a fairly major wine producing region. But today we're focused on Burgenland, and you can see it is the area in red on the map there. It is closest to the Hungarian border, so actually receives the most of that Hungarian or Pannonian climate, or that influence of the warm, dry air from Hungary. So therefore, it is the red wine producing region of Austria. There's also some really, really excellent world-class sweet wines that come from near that lake that you see there. That's Lake Neusiedl.
Indeed. That's my first introduction to the region, was certainly through the wines of Alois Kracher, which we will briefly touch on today. But let's talk about those climate influences that you brought up. So this map shows it pretty clearly that as we would imagine, weather coming from west to east in the northern hemisphere is going to bring that cool, moist air off the Atlantic across France. Some of it's going to get over towards Switzerland, through Switzerland and into Austria. Obviously, that leg of Austria off to the west there is mountainous, and a lot of it's going to get squeezed out there, but that's where that's coming from. And then number four, that's a climate influence of what?
The Mediterranean. You definitely feel that in southern Austria, in the Steiermark area, but there's definitely a mix of all these different climatic influences. Cold air also coming from the north, but the one that I mentioned already, the Pannonian climate. The reason it's called that is that in Roman times, Pannonia was a province of the Roman Empire, and so that's where this warm, dry air that comes from Hungary gets its name. But this is a very important factor in wine growing in Austria. It influences the Burgenland region the most. But part of the reason the wines of Austria taste the way that they do, including the Grüner Veltliners and Riesling, is because you've got this mix of different climates. Pannonian climate there is very, very important part of that.
Indeed. And do note, if you're looking at this, look off to the side and notice what latitude we're at, right? This is between 47 and 48 degrees latitude. So we're just below some of the, we're certainly a little further south than the Mosel. We're comparative to the latitude of Baden. We're, lined up with Champagne, in part of Champagne. So, this is fairly far north, and I think that it's really important for us to realize how much of that warm influence is helping here, because without that, we wouldn't be talking about great red wine for sure, and we might be talking about a completely different kind of white too, more like what we expect coming out of Germany. Although they're similar in that they use the same grapes and stuff, but Austria is warmer and more capable of making those dry styles of these wines that we've become used to than a lot of Germany is. And then coming from the north is that cooler continental influence coming out of weather patterns above Austria that can push some cold air down there. Still have some low-lying mountains that can protect it, but nonetheless, you get a little bit of that influence too. So let's look at this older map to get a sense of history.
I love this map. The red line that you see there is detailing what was the Austro-Hungarian Empire. There's a couple of things to point out here. If you can train your eyes to the west of Austria, you see Innsbruck. That's the capital of Tyrol. That's the kind of think winter sports skiing. But if you go south of there, Bolzano, that's actually the main city of Alto Adige, Italy, and that's prior to 1918. That was Austria, or at least the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And then the other part here that I think is really cool to look at the part that's highlighted there. See where Burgenland is? It was administratively part of Hungary during the Austro-Hungarian Empire. When this new country of Austria formed in 1918, the people of Burgenland were given an opportunity to vote by referendum whether they wanted to be in Hungary or in Austria. They voted to be in Austria. It was always what they called it before this, German-speaking West Hungary. So, and I think that also has worked out really well for them in terms of being a wine producer as well. So, formerly a part of Hungary there, Burgenland.
Yeah, that actually allowed that region to stay outside of the communist rule, which changed their history significantly when we think of how Hungary has battled back after communism to become relevant again. You're right. That's a huge deal for them.
Ron, that's exactly what I was driving at there. Yeah. Just another thing about that while we're looking at that map is that probably more so than of course anywhere else in Austria, you really sort of feel the Hungarian influence in terms of the cuisine and certainly some of the architecture, especially on the east side of Lake Neusiedl. It really starts to feel a lot like Hungary. So it's this very fascinating mix of culture here in the Burgenland region.
Just a curious question. Do they have a slightly different version of their language that's sort of a mix of the two, or is it still pretty much Austrian German?
I think it's usually, from what my ears can detect, it's kept pretty separately. So I've never, like a lingua franca is what you're talking about, and I've never really encountered that here.
Okay. Well, let's take a look at Lake Neusiedl, which I found to be a fascinating topic as I was reading about it, because I had no idea that it's a salt lake. I was like, oh, okay.
This is a really important, especially in the northern part of Burgenland. Like most big bodies of water that are in wine growing regions, it helps moderate the climate. And definitely once you get into late summer and the early part of fall, you get these really sort of cool nights here. And this lake is sort of moderating that climate, and so it plays a big role in the kinds of wines that come from here. When you're really really close to the lake, you will find some absolutely fantastic terroir for sweet wines. We've highlighted here the villages of Ilmitz and Apetlan. I wanted to point that out because, Ron, you already mentioned Crocker, but Alois Crocker was really sort of the person who put Austrian wine sort of front and center in the early mid-90s with some of these incredible sweet wines he was producing, these Trockenbeeren Auslese, and his winery is in Ilmitz. And so these areas close to the lake, great for sweet wine production because you can get this very consistent botrytis. And then the lake's playing a role for the other areas of Neusiedlersee because it's moderating the climate.
Yeah, so this will give you a great reason for that logic that we just pointed out for botrytis affected wines. If the Saron and its tributaries are fabulous for the area of Sauternes, can you imagine how much more humidity you can get off of this than a river running through it? So that's definitely a key ingredient to that region. I think it would be hard pressed to make a wine not botrytis affected in the area. It would take a significant amount of work, I would think.
Yeah, in here in Ilmitz, you have the lake, but you also have all of these ponds that are usually filled up with rainwater. So you've got the salty lake that is actually from groundwater, and these little ponds that are also just raising the humidity level of those areas. So great sweet wines come from here, and I just thought we should have a sort of moment of tribute here to Crocker because not only was this somebody that was responsible for really making the wine world aware of Burgenland in the early 90s, but really sort of drawing a lot of attention to Austrian wine in general, and really with some of those great TVAs of the 90s. That's where a lot of the world started paying attention to Austrian wine.
I certainly remember the first time I was shown a bottle and tasted it, and the awe I had of them from the very beginning. He was really a master of that craft. And yes, we should pay tribute to his memory, most assuredly. But we are supposed to be talking about red wine. So let's talk about red wine. Blaufränkisch, such a great poster. Where'd you find this?
Our colleague John Savo wrote, he loves Blaufränkisch. He actually produces it in Hungary. He's got a vineyard there where the variety is known as Kekfrankisch. But he wrote an article not too long ago, and I borrowed his image here. It was made a sort of a big splash at a fair in Vienna. Oh yeah, we've got the date right here, 1862. But the name Frankish, it actually is tied to Charlemagne, king of the Franks. In the early part of the Middle Ages, when Charlemagne arrived in the region, he went about not only improving viticulture and wine making, but also classifying the grape varieties that he would find there. So the less desirable grapes were known as Hunnish grapes, as in Attila the Hun, and the better grapes, Frankish, as in me, king of the Franks. So anyway, it takes its name from that. And this is really for me, the most important red variety of this region, although we have Zweigelt, which is the most planted red grape in Austria. And then we also see St. Laurent, which is a very interesting variety. St. Laurent is when you smell and taste it, it tastes a lot like Pinot Noir. And in fact, it probably is a very, very old mutation of Pinot Noir. Blaufränkisch, very important in this part of Europe. You also find it in Germany where it's known as Lemberger. Zweigelt is actually a crossing of those two. It's soft, it's fruity, it's easy to drink. That's probably why it's such a popular variety to grow and to consume in Austria. And then we see some international red grapes as well. You can actually find some really nice Pinot Noir in the Burgenland region. Cabernet Merlot were maybe more important in the early part of the 90s, but these days we see less of that. It's sometimes blended with the native grapes of Austria, but there's a saying that's oftentimes too warm for Pinot and too cold for Cabernet here. So I think the real key here is the native varieties of Burgenland.
Makes sense to me. And we're going to come back and talk specifically a little bit more about Blaufränkisch, but let's move on to the other things. When you're here and you're drinking white wine, Weissburgunder, just to remind everybody, that's Pinot Blanc by its Germanic name. Chardonnay might surprise you to be here, but it's a pretty big player. It's including the dessert wines, because Chardonnay actually is very susceptible to botrytis, and it works out quite well in the right scenarios. Sauvignon Blanc, I guess, is creeping its way over from Styria, perhaps, or has been there the whole time. You can tell me. We don't think of Gruner Veltliner driving the bus here, but it does exist. And Neuburger. What's Neuburger?
Neuburger, it's one of those real sort of genuine Austrian grape varieties. There's some legend about it that it was the cuttings were fished out of the Danube once and propagated from there. But it's a variety. They sort of treat it as if it's a Burgundian variety, so it's oftentimes vinified in wood, and you get this really sort of textural, broad style of white wine from Neuburger, an Austrian specialty for sure. And then to the right of there, we've got some varieties like Ferment and Velschriesling and Muscateller, Traminer. Those usually are the varieties of the sweet wine production that we were just speaking about, and over in Rust for Rooster Alsbruck.
Yeah, and then you will occasionally see Ferment dry, like Heidi Schrock makes a beautiful dry Ferment, and I'm sure there are other producers. So they're not exclusive, but that's their main point. And so let's invest a little time in Blaufränkisch and why should we pay attention to it, and make our arguments for that. This idea of closing off. It is easy and predictable to close off the boundaries of the world-class, most noble grapes to things that are older. Blaufränkisch is not a really old grape varietal. Nothing like Pinot Noir or Chardonnay or Syrah. But does that mean that it can't be on an equal playing field as far as quality is concerned? So let's have that discussion with that idea. So where do you want to start? Do you want to start with its individuality, its longevity, complexity? Where do you want to go?
I'm not exactly sure how old it is, but as being known as this varietal Blaufränkisch, I think this fair in Vienna in 1862 is where it made a big splash. If we're, how do we qualify a grape variety as world class? Is it a variety that expresses its terroir, its place of origin? Does it have the ability to be produced in a broad range of styles? Can it age? And I can tell you, Blaufränkisch is capable of all these things. It's retains acidity. So even in really warm vintages, it has a certain sort of freshness to it. I always find it has this sort of spicy complexity to it. So it's this multi-layered in terms of flavor. And yeah, I'm convinced, especially when we start talking about the different DACs here in the Burgenland region, you can really see how it sort of takes on the characteristics of its place. So it's very different on one soil type to another. And, for these reasons, I just find it to be one of the great red grape varieties of the world, even though it's something that's sort of localized, sort of specialized in Austria, in Hungary, and in southern Germany.
Yeah, we certainly can't punish the grape for being localized, right? How many of us, me included, I adore Nebbiolo, right? There's like two examples in the world outside of Piemonte that are really great Nebbiolo, but great Nebbiolo is as world-class as any grape varietal. We really can't punish it for being relatively new to the scene either. Cabernet Sauvignon was absolutely not that important before phylloxera destroyed Bordeaux, right? We really don't have a conversation about dominated wines by that grape variety until after the 1860s. And we actually have an example right here in its own home territory of its ability to adapt, right? Because it grows on both alkaline soils and acidic soils, and you get different expressions of that. And if the audience isn't really sure what I'm talking about, if you go in and you get these calcareous soils like Leithenberg area, those are alkaline soils like Burgundy. And if we get into sandy and schistose soils, now those are acidic soils, and they are in many cases tailored to other grape varietals around the world. Like, oh, this is schist-based soil. We're not going to grow that grape variety here because I want to grow that in alkaline soils. Very much, and the kinship to me comes into, we get to see, like, what's a great comparison? Oh, okay. So Pinot Noir and Burgundy is grown on alkaline soils, right? And what's the New World herald of great quality, maybe the Burgundy of the future, quote unquote, for the New World is what? Oregon. And it's almost all acidic soils based on volcanic origin. And yet both of those are beautiful expressions of that grape. It adapts to it. It figures out how to create greatness in both places. Blaufränkisch is doing that right there at home. And that's pretty cool. So I think I would go down this path with you. And the other is, well, what's your experience with it, right? You've had plenty. I've had some, and I've had some that were like, wow, that's amazing. And I've had some that were like, okay, that's pretty good. But I've had that with every noble grape variety, right?
Well, and I'll also say, I'll add this to that, is that in the when I first started tasting the red wines of Austria in the probably early 2000s, a lot of these were made almost in an international style. They had a certain, ripeness to them. They were using plenty of new oak back then. But these days, I think you see the approach to it being more, maybe treating it more like Pinot Noir in the cellar. It's a more gentle approach. And definitely, there's still small French oak barrels to be found. But the very trendy thing right now is to use these large, big casks. I mean, if you know the barrel producer Stockinger, actually an Austrian producer, these are big, giant casks that really the point there is not to have this oak influence, but to have this very slow sort of oxidative vinification and élevage. So they're finding their way with their red wines, and it's always, at least what I'm seeing, is it's going in the direction of refinement.
Okay, cool. Well, it's a region in evolution, and that's really cool to see. So let's move on out of interest of time, and hopefully we've made our point, and everyone will go buy a bottle of Blaufränkisch sometime this week. And let's talk about this major part of Austria's wine sector, and that is the sustainability movement that brings in these various things. Let's touch on this briefly, and then talk about regions.
Yeah, it's really important. You can see 23% of all Austrian agriculture is organic, but when it comes to wine, 15% of the vineyards in Austria are certified organic. There's only one country that has a higher percentage. It's Italy. So it's a very important part of wine culture here. And then you can see there's actually a certified sustainable. It's actually a government body that certifies vineyards as sustainable. So they have that there as well. And there's obviously a very strong biodynamic movement here as well.
Yeah. And one of the, I think, what is it? Austria and Germany seem to be the ones that are the strongest in the biodynamic movement by percentage in my observation. And I think that's really cool because, they're dedicated to making sure the land survives them. And that's really awesome. So let's take a little photo journey here and just enjoy this. Is this Eisenberg?
That is Eisenberg. Yeah.
Okay. So that's down south, and so let's talk about the DACs of Burgenland. So it's divided into these as of now: Mittelburgenland, Leithenberg, Eisenberg, Neusiedlersee, Rosalia, and Rooster Ausbruck, which is from 2020 is when that one starts. So we won't see that as a DAC on a bottle until it's vintage 2020, right?
I mean, it's one of the most historically important wines of Austria. The wines used to compete with the great Tokai wines of Hungary, but it was just given a DAC starting with the 2020 vintage. But DAC is a controlled appellation. It's exactly like AOC or DOC in Italy, and they've only had these since 2002. So it's a very sort of young and new idea, but it's based on terroir. It's a sort of appellation-based or origin-based way of thinking about the wines of Austria. And so here in the Burgenland region, we used to have these regions like Leithaberg used to be known as Neusiedlersee Hügelland. Didn't really roll off the tongue, but the most, I think, important geological factor here in the Leithaberg is that you've got this what they call it Leitha kalk, but it's this very calcareous soil that you'll find here. And so they've given these areas, these new names based on the geology of the regions. And these are the DACs of Burgenland.
Cool. And we're going to talk about each one and which grape it focuses on as we go, but at least we have the structure here. And note that their appellation system, the way they're doing this is it's both geographical boundary, production standards, and which grape applies to a DAC. So there are wines that can be made outside of the DAC designation in these locations that are of different varietals. So the Neusiedlersee, that's a beautiful view of it as you're looking down the hill into this steppe lake, in which we'll talk about briefly in the next slide. So just so you understand, this is a catchment that doesn't have a natural outlet. And that's one of the reasons it's become salty, right? That's what the oceans are. They're a worldwide catchment, and all of the salt coming out of the land ends up in the lake, like the Great Salt Lake of Utah and the Dead Sea in the Middle East. And that's what's going on here. And the groundwater is a little salty based on the fact that there's apparently salt underground here. So there must be some salt mines nearby, would be my assumption somewhere. But what's really interesting about this is it never gets beyond 5 feet and 11 inches or something like that deep in the whole lake. And if you read up on it a little bit, it has completely dried up multiple times throughout history. And even in recent history, like in the early 20th century, it dried up to the point that there's accounts of people walking across the lake. So note that this is it fluctuates. Now they've got some controls over it now, so it doesn't fluctuate quite as much as it used to. But the geology of everything around the lake is highly related to that fact that it grows and shrinks and grows and shrinks. So that's the lake itself, 22 miles long.
You can actually walk, not on the water, but you can walk across the lake now, and your head will be out of the water for almost the entirety of it. So it's a very, very shallow lake, and this is a very important factor for wine growing here. It's a DAC for Zweigelt. What's kind of interesting about that is that, of course, you have these really famous sweet wine villages that we've already spoken about, like Ilmitz and Apetlan. You can find those on the bottom part of the map there in the south. But then also, if you can find goals on the map, yep, thanks, Ron. That's actually a very important we've got a sort of a hillside and then a plateau there where there's always been much more than just Zweigelt here. It's actually some really nice vineyards for Blaufränkisch. Some of the vineyards have even some Cabernet and Merlot planted to them, some Pinot Noir as well. The DAC here, they chose Zweigelt maybe because it was the dominant variety, but the area around Goals and then those sweet wines were not really included in that. So if you want to make a red wine in Neusiedlersee and it's not Zweigelt, it just goes down to they call it the state level, but that would just be Burgenland is what you would see on the label.
Right. Just as a point of difference, why are these two areas different? The Parndorfer Plateau is non-calcareous gravel, for lack of a better, more detailed description. And when you get down to Seewinkel, it actually is a calcareous blended sand and gravel. And that's the main difference in what they do there, other than proximity to the lake. So there you go. Let's move on to Heideboden is an important vineyard there, right? And this is next to the city of Goals, as you see right there.
Yeah, maybe I'd call it a vineyard area, but you have the Parndorfer Platte, which is this raised sort of hillside and plateau, and then closer down below near the lake is the Heideboden, where it's very sort of gravelly soils. And just pointing that out on that map, just because there's some very different styles of wine that come from these two places.
All right. Well, let's move to this exciting idea of the Leitha-Kalk, because we have a picture next of the Leithaberg DAC and a digging of the kalk itself, and it's tremendously white and it looks like dense calcareous clay. But you've been there, you've touched it. What's it like?
We're on the northwest side of the lake now, and here the soil is just very different. You see they call that Leitha-Kalk, but it's this very highly calcareous soil. There's also schist to be found in the Leithaberg, and so you mentioned on being able to taste Blaufränkisch on these two very different soil types. You can do that actually right in the Leithaberg. So if you go to a winery like Gernot Heinrich, the one that Weinbo represents, you can taste Blaufränkisch side by side, same vintage, same winemaking, but two very different soils, and it's clearly two different wines.
My memory of the schist locations, and correct me because I may not be right here, is like some exposure due to elevation at Breitenbrunn and Einstadt. Is that correct, or is it spread throughout?
It's kind of spread throughout. I think maybe as you go further south here, you get into more of the schisty soils. Mm-hmm. Just point out also that because of this highly calcareous soil, it's also the DAC, when they established it, they said there could be white varieties included here as well. So it is a DAC for Blaufränkisch, but also white varieties such as Weissburgunder, Chardonnay. When we were talking about those, these are This is actually a great terroir for those varieties. There's some Grüne Veltliner here as well. You can actually make a blend of those white varieties, but this is a DAC for both red and white.
Is this also the one that allows Neuburger in the DAC?
Neuburger is one of them as well.
It's one of those weirdos that shows up, which is really cool. I love the weirdos that show up. And speaking of the schist, and I mean, Leithaberg, as you can tell from this picture, the viticulture is fairly intense here. When we start looking at others, there's a lot of vineyard area here, especially when we get down further to Eisenberg and you're like, oh, there's a vineyard here, and then there's one way over there. This is an idea of this schistose soil that's there. This is, it's sort of basically where in Leithaberg there was a prehistoric quiet sea that created this calcareous rock that is now the prime calcareous soil for the vineyards. Let's move into Rosalia DAC. We're now moving south in sort of the middle of, just north of Mittelburgenland, right?
This was a Großlagen, which is a term meaning a collective site. But in 2017, they applied for and got a DAC for this area of Rosalia. Again, it's a DAC for red wine and rosé, and a rosé is sort of a specialty here, but it's for Blaufränkisch or Zweigelt. And the characteristic of the wines, I kind of describe them as being very spicy, very sort of aromatic and sort of peppery, and you really get the sort of character of Blaufränkisch here.
And the map sort of shows this from its topographical nature, right? But if you look here, it's rolling hillside. This is one of the prime single vineyard reed, being that terminology. Let's move on to Mittelburgenland, a little bit more important DAC.
This was the first DAC for the Burgenland region, and it's for Blaufränkisch. And here, in fact, the other name this region goes by is Blaufränkischland. So you can imagine how important the variety is here. And here you generally have much deeper, sort of heavier soils. And I usually think of the Mittelburgenland as having the sort of the beefiest, more muscular style of Blaufränkisch. That being said, if you can find Neckenmarkt on the map there, that's one of the places where Moritz gets some really old vine Blaufränkisch, and I mean it's really more Pinot Noir like. So it's hard to make generalizations here, but I think heavier soils we tend to expect maybe bigger, beefier, more even muscular styles of wine.
That makes sense to me. And speaking of Blaufränkischland, here you go. It's the sign proving that it was welcoming us in there. And there's that Neckenmarkt village that you were talking about. And I wanted to stop here because we're getting far enough now into the presentation that if there are questions, please put them in the Q&A. We're not managing the chat window in order to keep our attention where it's supposed to be. And I will pose those questions as they come in. So please put them in the Q&A if you have them, and we will address them towards the end of the presentation. So Blaufränkisch land. That sounds like a place I'd like to put on my, like, here's my address. Where do you live? I live Blaufränkisch land. Why not?
I would definitely live there. That sounds good.
Yes, I know you would live in Austria. I'm not exactly sure what's stopping you other than your job is here. But we work remote now.
True.
All right, Eisenberg, your boss is going, Ron, stop it.
We used to call this region Süd Burgenland. So we're in the south now, but these vineyards, some of these vineyards, they sort of flow just right into the vineyards of the Steiermark, or the eastern part of the Steiermark region. But we're pretty far south now, and Eisen means iron. Really what we find here is a very sort of schisty soils, but sometimes you'll find this sort of band of iron through the soil makeup here. It's a DAC for Blaufränkisch since 2009. Here, I really think I'm getting pretty good at blind tasting these and taking it right to Eisenberg. The wines are pretty distinctive. They have a definite sort of mineral smokiness to them. And yeah, I just, in a blind tasting, or if I'm tasting a whole bunch of Blaufränkisch from these different DACs, the Eisenberg Blaufränkisch, it really sort of stands out to me.
That's really cool. And this is one of those areas that at least currently the Austrians themselves describe as sort of a mix of people who have this as a high tier hobby, and that they're, that like large winemaking is not really a thing here yet. That this is really about artisan, and I love this, and it's a craft, and I believe in this area more so than the huge economic drive.
We have some pretty high-profile producers here, but you're right. These are small vineyard holdings, and the vineyards. In fact, we saw a picture of them earlier, where it's not like the Côte d'Or, just a blanket of vines, but even some mixed agriculture here. But it's small vineyard holdings with some really high quality small producers that making some great wine here.
Yeah, and although it's not DAC, I saw a reference in the material I was reading that up here in Recknitz is more white wine focused, which I thought was very interesting. So just as you look at this giant area and you see these green splotches, is the best way to look at it. There's little green splotches of vineyards, so it kind of gives you the idea that it's a lot of room for growth here. And here's Eisenberg that we're speaking of, the sort of eponymous hill that names the DAC. All right. So the most important thing is that you go out and explore this region. And if you want to explore it with us, then you're going to be trying wines from Heinrich, which we encourage you to absolutely do. The wines are outstanding. He's fully biodynamic. And he has a pretty wide range of options for you, including a couple of wines that are considered natural, right? Hands off.
I mean, I think we should go ahead and call Heinrich a natural wine producer. They've really been evolving towards this way for a while now, and they make some great, really impressive wines without adding any sulfur, or very, very low levels of sulfur. As you mentioned, it's biodynamic, and they make a full range of wines, including some really outstanding Blaufränkisch, some of the best you'll find in Austria, but also some beautiful Sacklarent and Zweigelt. They are in Neusiedlersee, so Zweigelt very important to their production. But don't miss out on the white wines of this producer. They'll even do some whites with some very long maceration on the skins. And so they're always experimenting, always evolving, and we're very proud to represent them.
Yeah, I would, and we definitely are, for all the right reasons. Is his winery in Goals?
In Goals, yeah.
Okay, great. So if anybody wants to go visit, let us know. We'll do our best once COVID allows you in the country and all that good stuff. I don't have any questions so far, so if that's the way it's going to be, that's fine. We appreciate all of your attention out there in the audience. We hope that this inspired you to go out and find some wine from Burgenland. and give it a whirl and have your own argument. Maybe even call us and send us an email about how you believe or don't believe that Blaufränkisch is a noble variety. I think that Jesse and I are on the noble variety side of that argument based on our experience and what we think about the grape's potential. Last second. Well, thank you, Mario. Mario sent us a compliment. He loved the presentation, and we appreciate that. Everybody likes to hear a positive comment. Jesse, always a pleasure to have you teach alongside and to hear your passion for these wines. Thank you very much for your time today. And so we don't know our next topic yet. We haven't decided. So expect an email from us relatively soon announcing the next one. But you can mark your calendar for the second Wednesday of April. And we'll be back to join you with another episode of Between Two Somms.
Thanks, Ron. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.